Have you ever found yourself standing in the middle of a grocery store aisle, completely paralyzed by a decision that, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, means absolutely nothing?
Oh, absolutely. Like picking a brand of toothpaste or something.
Exactly. I'm not talking about buying a house. I'm talking about, trying to decide which email sign-off to use for a relatively low-stakes work message.
Right.
You're just sitting there staring at your screen, and instead of just making a choice, you take a screenshot, drop it into a group chat, and ask 3 different friends what they think.
Yeah, or you go online and read like 75 different reviews for a $20 blender.
Yes. Or you just ask an AI algorithm to write the email for you. It's this incredibly bizarre, entirely modern phenomenon where you suddenly feel like you just cannot trust your own judgment.
You really can.
You have the data, you have the experience, but that internal compass you usually rely on feels completely demagnetized.
It is a profoundly unsettling experience, primarily because we don't recognize it for what it actually is in the moment.
What do you mean?
Well, we usually frame it as, just being thorough or wanting to get it right. But clinically speaking, what you're describing is a moment where the mind actively refuses to validate its own signals.
Wow.
Yeah, the internal authority just collapses, and the immediate unconscious reaction is to outsource reality. We look everywhere but inward for the answer because the internal landscape suddenly feels, well, unsafe.
I think we all do this way more than we want to admit. And that exact phenomenon is the mission for this deep dive. We are unpacking the hidden architecture of the human self.
It's a huge topic.
It really is. We've gathered a fascinating stack of clinical psychology research, trauma theory, neuroscience, and psychoanalytic frameworks. We're going to look at everything from the Rosenberg self-esteem scale to the NIH's prediction error minimization framework.
Which is essentially the neurocomputational math of gaslighting, by the way.
Right. So our goal here is to dissect exactly how we build our sense of self, how toxic manipulators systematically dismantle it, and most importantly, how we can clinically and neurologically rebuild our internal sovereignty once it's been lost.
Which brings up a massive contradiction in how we culturally understand human behavior right now.
How so?
Well, if you look at self-help culture, corporate leadership training, or even just general parenting advice, the mandate is always, be confident, build your self-esteem, project certainty.
Oh, constantly. Fake it till you make it.
Exactly. But from a behavioral science perspective, confidence and self-esteem are just the shiny exterior of the vehicle. They're just the paint job.
Okay.
The true engine, the mechanism that actually dictates how you navigate your life, how you tolerate risk, and how you survive interpersonal trauma, operates about 5 layers deeper.
5 layers.
Yeah, in a concept called self-trust. And today, we are going completely under the hood to see exactly how it is built, how it is broken, and why it is the singular prerequisite for psychological freedom.
Let's start right there, because I think a lot of us use these terms completely interchangeably, like confidence, self-esteem, self-efficacy, self-trust. We just throw them all into this bucket labeled feeling good about myself. But the clinical literature treats them as incredibly distinct, separate mechanisms, right?
They are entirely distinct, and mapping their boundaries isn't just semantics, it's critical for clinical diagnosis and treatment.
Because if you get it wrong, you can't fix it.
Exactly. If a therapist misdiagnoses a lack of self-trust as a lack of self-esteem, the treatment will completely fail. So let's start with the most commonly used term, which is self-esteem.
Okay, define that for us.
In psychological literature, self-esteem represents our global emotional appraisal of our inherent human worth. It is a trait-like construct, meaning it stays relatively stable across time.
So it's not changing day to day.
Right. And neurologically, we actually see the medial prefrontal cortex light up when we engage in this kind of self-referential processing. It is the overarching answer to the question, am I a fundamentally valuable human being?
Okay, let's unpack this, because to measure that, psychologists have been using something called the Rosenberg self-esteem scale since the mid-1960s.
Yes, developed by Morris Rosenberg.
Right. And when I was reading through how the test is actually administered, the structure of it really stood out to me. It's only a 10-item questionnaire, but it's full of these psychological tripwires.
It's very cleverly designed.
It is. You have positive statements like, I feel I am a person of worth, at least on an equal plane with others. But then, interspersed right next to them, are reverse-scored statements like, all in all, I'm inclined to feel that I am a failure.
Right.
Why build a test that constantly contradicts itself?
to bypass the brain's defense mechanisms.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the human brain is a highly efficient energy-saving machine, and when taking a survey, it tends to fall into an acquiescence bias.
Like an autopilot.
Exactly, an autopilot where you just tick agree all the way down the page just to finish the task. Rosenberg used those reverse-scored, negatively worded items to force a cognitive interrupt.
Ah, so it trips you up on purpose.
Precisely. When you hit a statement like, "At times I think I am no good at all," it forces a momentary spike in cognitive dissonance. The respondent's performative rhythm is broken.
So they actually have to think about it.
They actually have to consult their internal emotional landscape to reconcile the contradiction. It strips away the performative mask of confidence to see what the underlying global appraisal actually is.
Okay, so that's the global appraisal of worth. I have value, but that doesn't mean I actually know how to do anything.
Right. Feeling valuable doesn't mean you can fly a helicopter.
Exactly. Which brings us to self-efficacy, pioneered by Albert Bandura. And this one really shifted my understanding of motivation.
Bandura's work is foundational because unlike self-esteem, self-efficacy is absolutely not about your overall worth.
What is it then?
It is a hyper-specific, situational, cognitive belief in your ability to control outcomes and execute particular tasks.
So it's task-based.
Yes. You could have remarkably low self-esteem. You might genuinely dislike yourself as a person, but have incredibly high self-efficacy when it comes to, say, writing a line of code or playing the piano.
I want to break down how that gets built, because Bandura says it relies on 4 pillars. The first is mastery experiences, which makes sense. I mean, that's just putting in the reps and actually succeeding at a task.
Yep, doing the thing successfully.
The second is vicarious experiences, which is watching someone similar to you succeed. It's like the 4-minute mile effect, right? Once one person does it, suddenly everyone's brain goes, oh, that's biologically possible.
Exactly. Seeing someone else do it lowers the mental barrier.
The third is social persuasion, which is getting genuine, credible encouragement. But the fourth pillar is the one that really caught my attention: emotional and somatic states.
Yes. The somatic state is where we transition from thought to biology.
Okay, explain that.
Bandura recognized that how your body physically feels when facing a challenge directly informs your belief in your capability. If your heart is pounding, your palms are sweating, and your stomach is in knots, your brain interprets those interoceptive signals as, I am ill-equipped for this, this is a threat.
But if you feel a surge of adrenaline, that your brain interprets as excitement.
Yes, rather than terror, your self-efficacy actually increases. Self-efficacy essentially asks the question, do I have the specific tools to execute this exact task in this exact moment?
Which brings us to the deepest layer, the one that governs everything else: self-trust.
The foundation.
Right. I was trying to visualize how these 3 interact, and I started thinking about it like a commercial airliner.
Oh, I like this. Let's hear it.
So self-efficacy is the pilot's training for a specific route. Like, I know how to fly this particular Boeing 737 into this particular airport.
Right, the specific skill.
Self-esteem's the maintenance log and the brand reputation. This is a valuable, well-built plane.
Okay, yeah.
But self-trust is the gyroscopic instrument panel. It's the deep internal navigational system.
Oh, that's spot on.
Because if you are flying into a storm and you lose visibility, do you trust the instruments in the cockpit to tell you which way is up? Or do you panic and start looking out the window asking the passengers what they think?
That is a highly accurate mechanistic analogy. Let's trace that down to its psychological core.
Okay.
If self-esteem asks, am I worthy? And self-efficacy asks, can I do this specific task? Self-trust asks an existential question.
Which is?
Can I rely on my own perception of reality, and will I remain connected to myself? Will I have my own back if the choice I make leads to complete failure?
Wow. Well, I have my own back.
Yes. Self-trust is the relational fabric connecting your conscious awareness to your internal guidance systems. It is the capacity to tolerate the vulnerability of your own judgment.
And when you frame it like that, it instantly explains a dynamic that used to completely baffle me.
What's that?
Well, we all know people, maybe CEOs, brilliant surgeons, top-tier artists, who have massive self-efficacy at their jobs. They are absolute masters of their craft, and they might even have high self-esteem. I mean, they demand respect, they know they are valuable, but when it comes to their personal relationships or their private lives, they have zero self-trust.
Exactly.
They constantly second-guess their partners, they sabotage connections, they outsource their emotional decisions to everyone else. They have the training and they know the plane is valuable, but their internal instrument panel is totally broken.
What's crucial to understand there is the neurobiological reality of that broken instrument panel. We tend to think of trust as a cognitive phenomenon, like a conclusion we reach after reviewing the
Right,
evidence.
like a logic puzzle.
But self-trust is not just a thought you can force yourself to have. It is an embodied somatic experience. Your body registers environmental and relational data through bottom-up interoceptive pathways.
Wait, pause right there. Bottom-up interoceptive pathways.
Yeah.
Translate that for me. What does that actually feel like in a daily lived experience?
It is the physical sensation that occurs before conscious thought.
Before that.
Yes. It's that sudden drop in your stomach when someone walks into the room before your brain has even registered who they actually are.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Or the subtle relaxation in your jaw when you make a decision that aligns with your core values before you've even articulated why it's the right choice.
Wow.
Your nervous system is constantly scanning the environment, a process called neuroception, and sending signals up the vagus nerve to the brain. It communicates safety or threat long before your conscious mind formulates a logical explanation.
So the body is processing truth before the brain even gets the memo.
Exactly. And when you genuinely trust yourself, your autonomic nervous system recognizes that you are a safe container for your own experience.
Meaning you aren't going to turn on yourself.
Right. It shifts out of chronic hypervigilance. We can actually measure this clinically. Heart rate variability improves, meaning your heart is highly responsive to your breath, which is a sign of a regulated nervous system.
And cortisol drops, I assume.
Yes. Cortisol drops. And crucially, your decisions are being processed in the prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic, executive function, and empathy.
But if you don't trust yourself.
If you don't trust yourself, the act of making a decision without external validation is interpreted by the amygdala as a literal biological threat to your survival.
A survival threat, just making a decision.
Yes. The brain says, I cannot accurately perceive reality, therefore I am in danger. You are thrown into a fight, flight, or freeze response.
That is so intense.
That is why it feels physically agonizing to make a choice when self-trust is compromised. You aren't just confused. You are in a state of biological survival, scanning for threats, even if you are just sitting in your living room trying to reply to a text message.
Okay, so that perfectly maps the internal architecture. But we don't live in a vacuum.
No, we don't.
How does that internal foundation dictate how we interact with the rest of the world?
Yeah.
I want to pull from the research we have from Frontiers in Psychology here, because it reveals that interpersonal trust, how we trust other people, actually operates on two entirely distinct dimensions.
It does, yes. It's not just a single sliding scale of I trust you or I don't.
Right. So what's the first dimension?
The first dimension is called the propensity to trust. This is a trait-based, deeply ingrained, self-focused inclination.
Self-focused.
Yes, it is your chronic baseline tendency to be vulnerable with others, and it is heavily tethered to your own internal sense of safety.
Okay.
The clinical research strongly correlates a high propensity to trust with personality traits like extroversion, agreeableness, and just a generally optimistic worldview.
So it's basically your default setting when you meet a stranger. It's the ability to say, the world is generally a safe place, and even if this person turns out to be a jerk, I have the internal resources to handle it.
Precisely.
It's actually more about me than it is about them.
It really is. It is an extension of your own self-trust. Now, the second dimension is other-focused trust, which is state-based, meaning it fluctuates based on context.
So this one changes depending on who you're talking to.
Exactly. This is your active cognitive judgment of a specific person's trustworthiness based on their integrity, their competence, their past actions, and your ongoing observation of them.
So propensity to trust is, do I feel safe enough in my own skin to be vulnerable? And other focused trust is, has this specific person proven that they won't weaponize my vulnerability?
Correct. And the psychological friction happens when those two dimensions are misaligned.
Which makes me wonder, what happens when our internal self-trust is completely miscalibrated? How does a cracked foundation bleed into our external reality?
It changes everything.
Right, like if my internal instrument panel is broken, how do I go about judging other people's trustworthiness?
To answer that, we really have to look at the work of philosopher Alessandra Tonassini. She developed a taxonomy of intellectual self-trust profiles.
Okay, let's go through these.
What she essentially did was expose the deep trauma adaptations and shame regulation strategies that are operating beneath our everyday behaviors. She breaks it down into 4 distinct profiles. Let's start with the baseline of health, which she calls confident optimism.
Right, this is the goal.
Yes. Confident optimism is well-calibrated trust. An individual with this profile is steadfast in their beliefs, but not dogmatic.
So they can change their mind.
Exactly. They are open to new evidence. And fundamentally, this profile is rooted in a secure, non-contingent self-esteem. Their sense of human worth is not tied to being right. Therefore, they can afford to be wrong without experiencing an existential crisis.
They can say, oh, I misunderstood that data point, without their brain screaming, I am a fundamentally defective human being.
Exactly. But then we move into the trauma adaptations, where the internal foundation is compromised.
Okay, what's the first one of those?
The second profile is arrogant self-trust. Now, externally, this looks like supreme, unshakable confidence. But clinically, it is a defensive masquerade.
Oh, I know this person. This is the person who doubles down in a meeting when you present them with an Excel sheet that mathematically proves their strategy is failing.
Yes.
They don't just ignore the data, they attack the person presenting it.
Yes, and we have to go a layer deeper to understand why they do that. Arrogant self-trust is rooted in highly fragile, contingent self-esteem.
So they actually have low self-esteem.
Very low. This individual massively overestimates their cognitive reliability because they psychologically cannot afford to be wrong. For them, being wrong is intimately tied to deep unconscious shame and a profound fear of worthlessness.
Wow.
Their defense mechanism against that shame is grandiosity. So they become closed-minded, dogmatic, and completely refuse to admit flaws. They will literally distort reality to protect their fragile ego.
It's essentially a narcissistic adaptation. The arrogance isn't because they think they are God, it's because they are terrified they are garbage.
Yeah.
And the arrogance is just the armor.
Precisely. It is identity protection at all costs. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we find the third profile, which is timid self-trust.
Okay, what does that look like?
This is characterized by a chronic, debilitating underestimation of one's own memory, perception, and intellect.
In real time, how does that play out?
It looks like the brilliant employee who never speaks up in the brainstorm, or the partner who just assumes they must have misunderstood an agreement when a conflict arises.
Oh, man.
It is rooted in a profound fear of failure and deeply depleted self-esteem. These individuals intensely avoid what epistemologists call epistemic risk.
Meaning they don't want to bet on their own knowledge.
Right. They will not assert their beliefs or stake a claim on the truth because they are terrified of the shame of being incorrect or facing rejection. They would literally rather assume they are wrong than risk the vulnerability of being right and being challenged.
Which brings us to the fourth profile, which the literature highlights as the most dangerous and vulnerable state: servile self-trust.
Servile self-trust is the complete, systematic outsourcing of cognitive authority to dominant figures.
It goes beyond just being timid.
It does. It is rooted in severely depleted self-worth and incredibly high attachment anxiety. The individual's internal reality feels so painful, so chaotic, and so inherently flawed that they automatically defer to whoever's in the room acting with certainty.
They're essentially looking for an external hard drive to store their sense of reality on.
Exactly. They abandon their own perception to merge with the perception of an authority figure, whether that's a romantic partner, a boss, or a religious leader, because the fear of abandonment is far stronger than their commitment to objective reality.
And we absolutely cannot talk about these profiles without talking about how society actively manufactures them.
Oh, absolutely. This is systemic.
Right. This doesn't just happen because someone had a critical mother. There's a systemic component here that the research calls epistemic injustice. Can we dig into that?
Yeah.
Because it really reframes how we view marginalized groups.
Epistemic injustice is a brilliant concept. It explains how social power dynamics shape our internal self-trust. Marginalized individuals, whether based on race, gender, class, or neurodivergence, are routinely subjected to persistent microaggressions, credibility deficits, and structural exclusion.
So they are constantly questioned.
Constantly. When they speak, they are statistically more likely to be interrupted, second-guessed, or asked for excessive proof compared to their privileged counterparts.
They are constantly invalidated as knowers. Like if you tell a woman, oh, you're just being emotional, or you tell a person of color, I think you're misinterpreting that interaction, you are actively telling them that their internal instrument panel is broken.
Yes.
And if society does that to you 10 times a day for 30 years, it literally rewires your brain.
Yeah.
You're systemically conditioned into timid or servile self-trust because the environment relentlessly punishes you for confident optimism.
That is exactly what happens. The systemic invalidation acts as a form of chronic low-grade trauma that erodes the very foundation of self-trust. And conversely, dominant social classes often receive unwarranted credibility excesses.
Credibility excesses,
Yeah.
meaning they get believed when they shouldn't.
Yes, their ideas are validated, celebrated, and funded even when they are objectively incorrect or completely mediocre.
Which brings the arrogant self-trust profile.
Yes. We end up with this deeply toxic, self-reinforcing social loop. The overconfident dominant class dismisses the testimonies and lived experiences of the marginalized, which further erodes the marginalized individual's self-trust.
Pushing them further into timidity.
Right, which the dominant class then uses as quote-unquote proof that the marginalized group lacks leadership qualities. It is a systemic hijacking of identity.
Which is a perfect, albeit dark, transition into the most chilling part of this entire deep dive. We've established that people with servile or timid self-trust outsource their reality. They look to others to tell them what is true.
They do.
But what happens when the person they are outsourcing it to is a toxic manipulator? What happens when the person holding your external hard drive decides to rewrite the code?
We are entering the territory of psychological abuse. We are talking about gaslighting.
The term itself is everywhere now.
Yep.
I mean, it originates from the 1938 Patrick Hamilton play, Gaslight, which was later made into a famous movie.
Great film.
And the plot is literal, right? A husband purposely dims the gas lights in the house. And when his wife points out that it's getting darker, he tells her she's imagining it. He denies objective reality in order to drive her insane so he can steal from her.
Right.
But clinically, in 2026, gaslighting isn't just lying, right? If I ate the last slice of pizza and tell you I didn't, I'm just a liar. I'm not gaslighting you.
No, lying is an event. Gaslighting is a deliberate, methodical process. It is a sustained campaign of psychological manipulation designed to make a target question their perception of reality, their memory, and ultimately their fundamental sanity.
And the goal is what?
The goal of the gaslighter is complete coercive control. By dismantling the victim's self-trust, the abuser installs themselves as the sole arbiter of truth.
And the mechanics of how this actually works on a neurological level are terrifying. I want to spend significant time here because we are pulling from the National Institutes of Health, specifically a neurocomputational framework called prediction error minimization, or PEM.
Yes, PEM.
This isn't just abstract theory. This is the literal math of how a human brain breaks. The NIH breaks gaslighting down into 5 sequential stages. Walk us through layer 1.
Stage 1 is relational epistemic dependency. This is the setup. The human brain is, at its core, a predictive machine. We constantly generate models of what will happen next to keep ourselves safe.
Right.
But we can't process all the data in the world by ourselves, so we fulfill this biological need by forming close attachment bonds. We create a shared reality with our partners, family members, or close friends.
Because if we agree on what's dangerous and what's safe, we have a better chance of surviving.
Exactly. And in doing so, the brain assigns a high-precision weight to the partner's input.
Wait, precision weight, let's use our airplane analogy again. Is this like the flight computer deciding how much trust to put into different sensors?
Yes. Imagine a flight computer receiving data from its own internal gyroscopes, but also from an external control tower. Because the pilot deeply trusts the control tower, the computer assigns a high mathematical weight to the tower's signals.
Okay, that makes sense.
In human relationships, we wire our nervous systems to deeply trust our partner's input, sometimes even prioritizing it over our own initial perceptions because the attachment bond demands it. We just let our guard down.
Okay, so the foundation is built. The victim trusts the abuser completely. What is stage 2?
Stage 2 is surprise and prediction error. The abuser introduces volatile, contradictory behavior.
Like what?
It could be a sudden, unprovoked outburst of rage or an absolute flat-out denial of a shared objective fact. For example, the abuser screams at the victim in public or denies a conversation that happened 10 minutes ago.
And what happens in the victim's brain in that split second?
It creates a massive predictive violation. The victim's brain says, wait, this data does not match the safe, loving model of reality I've constructed. The control tower is sending a signal that contradicts my instruments.
And that causes panic.
It triggers extreme cognitive dissonance. The amygdala fires, cortisol spikes, and the victim experiences profound disorientation and anxiety.
Which leads directly to stage 3 attributional reframing. This is where the actual manipulation occurs.
Yes.
The abuser doesn't just deny the event. They reframe the source of the conflict as the victim's own defective nature. The abuser looks right at the victim and says, "You're too sensitive," or "You're acting crazy," or "That never happened. Your memory is terrible."
The abuser shifts the locus of the error from their own behavior to the victim's cognitive capacity. They aren't just saying, "I didn't do it." They are saying, "You are incapable of perceiving what I did."
And this is where the neurological twist happens, and where I genuinely had to pause and reread the research, because it feels counter to every survival instinct we have.
It really is wild.
Stage 4 is called prior model updating. The victim is faced with a choice: trust their own memory or trust the partner who is calling them crazy. And under the extreme stress of this cognitive dissonance, the victim's prefrontal cortex, the logical brain, actually downregulates.
Yes, the executive function becomes compromised by the sheer volume of stress hormones.
And the brain decides to update its model. But it doesn't update the model to say, "My partner is a liar and an abuser." It updates the model to say, "I must be broken."
Yes.
Why on earth would our brains choose to cannibalize our own sanity just to agree with someone else?
To understand this, we have to look through the lens of evolutionary biology and attachment theory. You have to remember the hierarchy of human survival needs. To a mammalian brain, isolation is death.
Wow, okay.
The amygdala perceives the potential loss of this primary attachment figure not as a sad breakup, but as a literal physical threat to survival. The fear of abandonment is so acute, so terrifying, that the brain is forced into a tragic neurocomputational trade-off.
It's doing the terrifying math of survival?
Exactly. The unconscious logic goes like this. If my partner is abusive, then this relationship is profoundly unsafe. If I leave, I will be abandoned, isolated, and I will die.
So it chooses the lesser of two evils.
Yes. Therefore, it is biologically safer for my partner to be right and for me to be fundamentally broken. The brain literally sacrifices its grip on objective reality to maintain the perceived safety of the attachment. It is a profound, albeit destructive, trauma adaptation.
That is absolutely devastating. The brain literally sacrifices truth for attachment. It chooses insanity over abandonment.
And this culminates in the final phase, stage 5, which is epistemic submission.
Submission.
Yes. The victim's identity fundamentally shifts. The temporary confusion becomes a permanent trait. They adopt the new reality. My judgment is inherently unreliable. My partner is the sole source of objective truth.
So they've completely lost their internal sovereignty.
Completely. Their self-trust is not just damaged, it is mathematically zeroed out.
And the research notes that this submission is reinforced by something called the illusory truth effect. Can you explain that?
The illusory truth effect is a cognitive bias where people are more likely to believe false information to be correct after repeated exposure.
Just because they hear it a lot.
Yes. If the gaslighter repeats the phrase, "You have a terrible memory," or "You always overreact," hundreds of times over the course of a year, the victim's neural pathways begin to process it as a baseline truth simply because of the fluency of the repetition. The brain mistakes familiarity for validity.
It's a complete dismantling of the foundation. Now, we can easily see the villain when a romantic partner or a toxic narcissistic boss is doing this to us. It's a horror movie happening in real life.
It is.
But what happens when the gaslighter is inside our own head? Because we don't always need an external abuser to run this exact same prediction error minimization script on us. We are highly capable of gaslighting ourselves.
And that brings us to the most pervasive internal gaslighter of all. Perfectionism.
I feel like perfectionism has a PR problem, or rather, it has great PR. We use it in job interviews as a humble brag.
Right. My biggest weakness is that I'm a perfectionist.
Exactly. I just care too much. People view it as a relentless drive for excellence or a commitment to high achievement. But the clinical sources paint a radically different, much darker picture.
Clinically speaking, perfectionism has absolutely nothing to do with excellence.
What is it then?
Perfectionism is an illusion, and it functions as a rigid, maladaptive defense mechanism against feeling inadequate. It is entirely driven by the fear of exposure, the fear of rejection, and the desperate need for shame regulation.
So it's the fear that if people see the real, flawed, the messy, unpolished human me, I will be profoundly rejected and abandoned.
Precisely. It's about safety. High achievers strive for excellence because they enjoy the process of mastery. Perfectionists strive for flawlessness because they believe it is the only armor that will protect them from the agony of shame.
Wow.
And the literature divides this psychological armor into 3 distinct dimensions.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first is self-oriented perfectionism.
This is where you hold impossible, punishing internal standards for yourself. It's the voice that says, If I don't run 5 miles every single morning, I am an undisciplined failure.
It's the internalized punitive parent. The second dimension is other-oriented perfectionism. This is where you externalize your internal rigidity and demand flawlessness from everyone around you.
Which has to be an absolute nightmare for relationships.
It destroys them. The other-oriented perfectionist cannot tolerate flaws in their partner, their children, or their coworkers because those flaws trigger the perfectionist's own deep-seated anxiety about imperfection.
Right.
They criticize endlessly, which ironically creates the exact isolation and rejection they were trying to avoid in the first place.
And the third dimension, which the data suggests is the most psychologically damaging, is socially prescribed perfectionism.
Yes, this is the deeply internalized paranoid belief that everyone else expects absolute flawlessness from you, and the moment you make a mistake, you will be ostracized.
So you believe your worth is entirely conditional on meeting the impossible expectations of the group.
Exactly.
Which leads directly to a fascinating yet heartbreaking concept mentioned in our research, duck syndrome.
Ah, yes.
This is a term originally coined at Stanford University to describe what clinicians were seeing in high-achieving college students. It's the image of a duck gliding perfectly smoothly, calmly across the surface of the water. They look effortless. But underneath the surface, completely out of sight, they are paddling furiously, desperately, exhaustingly, just to stay afloat.
Duck syndrome is the ultimate manifestation of socially prescribed perfectionism. It ties a person's self-worth entirely to how they appear to others, forcing them to completely hide their struggles, their anxiety, and their humanity.
It creates a profound sense of imposter syndrome, doesn't it?
Absolutely, because they know the calm surface is a lie.
And this reveals a brutal psychological paradox for anyone listening right now who identifies as a perfectionist. I really want to highlight this. The harder you try to be perfect in order to protect your self-esteem, the more you actively destroy it.
It is a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure.
Because the standard is impossible.
Right. Because perfectionism is based on an impossible standard, the perfectionist is essentially setting a trap for themselves every single day. They engage in severe cognitive distortions. They use extreme all-or-nothing thinking.
Like if this presentation isn't flawless, it's garbage.
Exactly. If I get an A-, I am a failure. They catastrophize minor setbacks.
So by setting a standard that no human being can meet, they guarantee that they will fail.
Exactly. They set themselves up for guaranteed, repeated failures. And every single perceived failure validates their core unconscious wound. The brain says, see, I knew it, I tried my hardest, I was perfect, and I still missed a detail. I am fundamentally not good enough.
It is literally an internal gaslighting loop.
Yes.
You are the abuser and the victim simultaneously. You set an impossible goal, that's the prediction error. You fail to meet it, you reframe the failure as proof of your defective nature, that's the attributional reframing. And you update your model to further cement your lack of worth.
That's the PEM framework happening internally.
You are constantly telling yourself that your best isn't your best, that your reality isn't good enough, and that your internal instrument panel cannot be trusted.
And because that internal instrument panel is under constant attack from the inner critic, we see this lack of self-trust manifesting in the modern world in a massive epidemic of decision paralysis.
Oh, this is exactly what we opened the show with. Think about it. You and I have the easiest, most frictionless access to information in the entire history of the human race.
We do.
I can look up the molecular structure of a star, or the best way to roast a chicken, in 3 seconds. Yet collectively, we are highly, painfully indecisive. We outsource our inner authority to Reddit threads, to 5-star review aggregates, to self-help gurus, and increasingly to AI algorithms. Why are we doing this?
Because constantly seeking external validation actively weakens your internal signal.
How so?
When you rely on an algorithm, a consensus, or a group chat to make a choice, you stop asking yourself the fundamental question of self-trust, which is, what do I intuitively know to be true? Instead, you operate from a place of deficit, asking, what am I missing? What data point haven't I considered?
So the abundance of information actually makes us feel less capable.
Yes. From a neurological perspective, it is a nervous system adaptation to overwhelm.
Right.
The brain is flooded with data, and the perfectionistic inner critic is terrified of the shame associated with making a suboptimal choice. The amygdala perceives the potential for regret as a massive threat.
So it just shuts down.
So the brain decides that it is biologically safer to delay the decision entirely or to outsource it to a machine than to choose wrong and face the internal punishment of the inner critic.
We are outsourcing our sovereignty because we are afraid of the vulnerability of choice. We are letting the fear of shame dictate our lives.
That's exactly it.
So let's take a breath and synthesize where we are. We have seen how the deep foundation of self-trust is systematically eroded. It's eroded by early relational trauma and invalidation. It's eroded by systemic, societal injustice and microaggressions.
Yes.
It gets violently dismantled by the PM loop of external gaslighting, and it gets quietly, persistently chipped away by our own internal perfectionism. The foundation of the house is cracked. The instrument panel is shattered. So the ultimate question is, how do we get it back? How do we rebuild a sovereign self?
The clinical restoration of self-trust requires a paradigm shift in how we approach healing. Because we live in a highly intellectualized culture, most people assume that insight is the cure.
Right.
They think, if I just read enough books, or if I can just logically understand that my partner is a narcissist, or if I just realize that my perfectionism is a trauma response, I will be cured.
Right, I have the vocabulary now, so I should be fixed.
But cognitive breakthroughs are not enough. You cannot think your way out of a nervous system response.
Say that again?
You cannot think your way out of a nervous system response. The physiological reality is that trauma, invalidation, and gaslighting live in the body. They live in the amygdala, the vagus nerve, and the autonomic nervous system. The absolute neurological prerequisite for rebuilding self-trust is regulating the nervous system.
Because if you are still in a state of biological fight or flight, your prefrontal cortex, your center for logic, self-reflection, and identity is still offline. You can't access your true self if your body thinks a tiger is chasing you.
Exactly. We have to pull the body out of chronic threat scanning first. This is where specific clinical modalities become essential.
Like what?
Traditional talk therapy is helpful, but modalities like EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and reprocessing accelerated resolution therapy, or RT, and somatic mindfulness are incredibly effective here.
What do they actually do?
They use bilateral stimulation or body-based awareness to help the nervous system process and integrate trapped traumatic memories. They essentially tell the amygdala, the threat is in the past, we are safe now. Once the alarm bells stop ringing, the prefrontal cortex can come back online and the actual work of rebuilding trust can begin.
And once the nervous system is calmer, how do we actually rebuild that trust? I was thinking about this, and it struck me that rebuilding trust with yourself is exactly like rebuilding trust with a friend who betrayed you.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Because if a close friend lies to you, steals from you, and betrays your confidence, they can't just come up to you, apologize once, and say, okay, we're good now, right? It doesn't work.
Not at all.
Trust is built in the micro moments. It takes consistent, small proofs of reliability over an extended period of time.
That is a perfect framework. Clinically, we call these the micro decisions of self-consistency.
Okay, I love that phrase.
When you have gaslit yourself or allowed others to do it, your brain has empirical evidence that you are an unreliable narrator. You have to provide new empirical evidence.
What does a micro decision of self-consistency look like in daily life?
It is profoundly small. It is keeping a minor promise to yourself. If you say you're going to drink a glass of water when you wake up, you drink the water.
That's that simple.
It really is. It's setting a tiny boundary, like telling a coworker, I can't take on this project right now, and actually holding that boundary when they push back rather than instantly folding. Or, importantly, it is simply resting when you are tired without absolutely drowning yourself in the guilt of unproductivity.
It's acting in alignment with your internal signals, like, I feel tired, therefore I will rest, my signal is valid.
Yes. Every time you honor an internal signal, those micro decisions act as neurological proof for your brain that you are becoming a reliable agent in your own life. The instrument panel is starting to calibrate.
And to sustain this calibration, especially when the inner critic flares up, the research points heavily to Dr. Kristin Neff's framework of radical self-compassion. Now, I know self-compassion sounds a bit like a throw pillow slogan, but her research proves it is the ultimate scientifically backed antidote to the perfectionist loop.
It absolutely is.
She identifies 3 core active components.
Yes. The first component is self-kindness. This means actively treating yourself with the warmth, understanding, and grace you would naturally offer a good friend who is suffering.
Okay.
From a neurobiological standpoint, actively practicing self-kindness engages the parasympathetic nervous system. It stimulates the mammalian caregiving system, releasing oxytocin and reducing cortisol. You are literally bathing your brain in safety chemistry.
Wait, I have to push back here because I know exactly what the high achievers and perfectionists listening are thinking right now. If I am kind to myself when I fail, I will lose my edge. There's a deep fear that self-compassion just means letting yourself off the hook. Is it just an excuse to be lazy, lower your standards, and sit on the couch eating ice cream while your life falls apart?
It is the most common misconception about self-compassion, but the psychological research vehemently pushes back against that.
Okay.
Dr. Neff identifies two distinct faces of self-compassion. What you are describing, the soothing, accepting, nurturing energy, is tender compassion. It says, you are hurting and I am here for you. But there is a second, equally important face. Fierce compassion.
What does fierce compassion look like?
It is the mama bear energy. It is the fierce drive for self-protection, for setting rigid boundaries against abusive behavior, and for taking radical accountability to drive change.
Wow.
Fierce compassion says, I love myself too much to let myself stay stuck in this toxic relationship or this destructive habit. Therefore, I am going to hold myself accountable to do the hard work of getting out.
Wow. So it's not letting yourself off the hook. It's holding yourself to a standard of genuine well-being.
Exactly. The research shows that self-compassion is not laziness. It is actually the most sustainable form of motivation.
Because shame burns you out.
Shame is a terrible long-term motivator because it eventually causes the system to shut down. Compassion allows you to fail, learn from the failure without identity collapse, and try again.
I absolutely love that distinction, tender and fierce. What are the other two components of Neff's framework?
The second is shared humanity. Perfectionism and shame thrive in dark isolation. They convince you that your specific flaw makes you uniquely broken and unlovable.
Like you're the only one who feels this way.
Right. Shared humanity is the cognitive recognition that suffering, failure, inadequacy, and making terrible mistakes are an inherent part of the universal human experience. When you realize that everyone struggles, it defeats the isolation that gives shame its power.
I am not a monster. I am just a human having a human experience.
Yes. And the third component is mindfulness. In this context, mindfulness is the ability to observe your negative emotions, your anxiety, or your inner critic's harsh thoughts without identifying with them, and crucially, without suppressing them.
You just let them be there.
You notice the anxiety rising in your chest, but you do not become the anxiety. You observe it as a passing weather pattern rather than a permanent state of identity.
And to put a practical structure around all of this, I want to bring in the braving framework. This was developed by Dr. Brené Brown originally to understand interpersonal trust, but it applies perfectly to self-trust. It's a brilliant acronym for nurturing your internal foundation through authentic daily actions.
Yes. The Braving Inventory operationalizes the abstract concept of self-trust into a literal checklist.
Let's run through it. B is for boundaries. Did I respect my own limits today? R is for reliability. Did I do what I said I was going to do for myself? A is for accountability. Did I own my mistakes without spiraling into a shame pit? V is for vault. Did I keep my own confidences, or did I overshare my vulnerabilities with unsafe people just to get validation?
The vault is incredibly important for self-trust. It means treating your inner life as sacred.
I love that. Moving on, I is for integrity. Did I choose courage over comfort? N is for non-judgment. Can I ask for what I need without judging myself for needing it?
And then the G.
Yes, G is for generosity. Am I assuming the most generous intent regarding my own actions? Did I screw up because I'm a bad person, or did I screw up because I was just exhausted?
When you practice the elements of braving internally, day after day, you begin to systematically heal the attachment wound you have with yourself. You become the safe, reliable partner that your nervous system has been searching for externally.
So what does this all mean? If we zoom all the way out and look at the massive landscape we've covered today, the core journey for you, the listeners, realizing that your confidence, your self-efficacy, and your self-esteem are just the weather.
Just the weather.
They will change based on the day, the task, the environment, and the feedback you get from the world.
Yeah.
But self-trust is the climate. It is the deep, enduring reality of your internal ecosystem.
Beautifully said.
Whether you have had your reality violently distorted by a narcissistic gaslighter running a prediction error loop on you, or you have been systematically distorting it yourself through the impossible demands of perfectionism, the most important takeaway is this: your internal compass isn't broken.
No, it's not.
Your instrument panel hasn't been destroyed. It's just been overridden. It was overridden by trauma, by fear, and by a desperate biological need to feel safe in an unpredictable world. But by regulating your nervous system, by practicing fierce self-compassion, and by committing to those tiny micro-decisions of self-consistency, you can reclaim your epistemic sovereignty. You can take the wheel back.
And as we conclude this exploration, I want to leave you with a final lingering question to ponder as you navigate the modern world. We've established today that our brains are incredibly plastic, predictive machines. They are constantly updating our sense of reality, rewriting our models, and calibrating our self-trust based on the feedback we receive from our closest relationships and our immediate environments.
Okay.
If that neurobiological reality is true, what happens to society's collective self-trust as we increasingly immerse ourselves in curated, algorithmically driven virtual realities? What happens to the human psyche and our ability to trust our own intuition when the truth we are fed daily through our screens is inherently fluid, mathematically manipulated, and designed primarily to keep our amygdalas engaged in a state of outrage or fear rather than grounded in objective reality?
Wow. That is a terrifying and utterly essential question to sit with. Are we being collectively gaslit by the very tools we use to understand the world? We want to thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep dive. We invite you to take a breath, step away from the algorithms and the group chats for a moment, trust your gut, and explore these layers within yourself. The foundation is waiting to be rebuilt. You've got this.